Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So we all know what happened. The devs decided that Japan should join Germany and US and get another Ofenrohr, which is just, I don't know, it's funny. Like I think it's good to have high penetration anti-tank weaponry for all nations, but there's better options. Like I guess like the argument is they could be using the developer time and effort somewhere else and just have a copy paste like anti whatever weapon. But the cool thing is both the US and Japan have their own options for what they could use instead of the Ofenrohr that are actually like developed by their respective nations. So today we're going to go over some of them. We'll actually start with, we'll start with the US and talk about a couple of their options. The first one being the M9E2, which was a prototype developed pretty much to fire a new type of rocket called the T-59. Now this T-59 rocket compared to the, I believe, M6A1 rocket that was being used by both the M1 and M9. This T-59 rocket had a lot more penetration, a lot more penetrative power. It could penetrate up to 8 inches of armor, 203 millimeters, which is pretty much the same as the Ofenrohr. So aside from the projectile diameter, which is it affects the amount of damage that a weapon does, it would have the same penetrative power. So you could argue it'd be comparable to the Ofenrohr, maybe like slightly worse. An alternative to that would actually be the T-84, which most people know as the M20 Super Bazooka. Now, the Super Bazooka began its development in 1944. There's actually a weapon that slightly predates it called the T-24, which is slightly smaller at 3.25 inches instead of 3.5. But this eventually developed into a 3.5 inch weapon. And the T-74, I believe its projectile had upwards of 10 inches of penetration, at least the production variant. The early versions of the projectile that were produced during the war were, depending on the source, like as low as 100 millimeters, but yeah, that could also be an option. So all of those options there provide plenty of choice for the US getting its own weapon. If you wanted to include the United Kingdom, like Britain as well, since, it's kind of like a mix of United States and the Commonwealth, you could also include the Bernie, I think it's also a 3.5 inch recoilless rifle. And what it has a Hess shell with about 152 millimeters of pen. Now you'll think that's not a whole lot, but the cool thing is it is regardless of angle of attack. So 152 millimeters of pen, to give you some perspective, could actually penetrate the upper frontal plate of a Tiger II. So with that being said, it could have like relatively comparable effectiveness to the Ofenrohr, just you have to like aim it differently because of how it works. So that's all the options for the US. For Japan, it gets a little bit different. I will start by mentioning the 9cm Type 4. It's the same as the Type 4 in game currently, except that one's only 70 millimeters. This other one is 90 millimeters. So its projectile has about 120 millimeters of penetration. So essentially it's their equivalent of an M9. that's currently in game at BR3. So yeah, we would start with Japan getting a BR3 rocket launcher, and then finally the weapon that I would put at BR4 or 5 is the Jite Dan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think it's close, but essentially what it is it's a grenade launcher sort of weapon, but instead of being used for, you know, like say like a normal rifle, it's a much larger projectile shooting from an anti-tank gun. So a lot more oomph coming out of that. And this thing, depending on the source, has 200 to 250 millimeters of pen. And what would make this thing really cool is treat it like kind of like a grenade launcher, like the BR3 grenade launchers, except it's an anti-tank weapon. And, you know, so it's still like a little clunky to use at top tier, like, you know, the semi-auto rifle element of it. But then you have something that can go through, you know, most tanks. And then, of course, you're limited by the number of anti-tank soldiers in your squad. So it's not like you can run a 9-man Type 97 AT plus Jite sort of squad. So all I had to say, you would have a weapon that actually has a lot of flexibility. It just wouldn't have the range potential of like the Ofenrohr, because all of a sudden you can go, instead of having a rocket that you can fire like 100 meters away effectively, you have something that maybe is up to 50 meters, because it's more of like, again, something like an Ofenrohr or a grenade launcher, but then you also have that Type 97 anti-tank rifle capability. So it'd be really strong, really flexible, just in a different way to the Ofenrohr. And with that being said, that is all of the potential weapons that I wanted to talk about today. I might do more videos like this kind, where it's like kind of like a suggestion, and I might even put this video in the forums, and that way the developers can actually see it and potentially take the feedback. So yeah, if you guys like the idea, let me know in the comments. If you don't like the idea, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear why. And yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good day.